Hello, my beautiful doves. My name is Mina, and welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going to be talking about TikTok maximalism. Specifically this. I'm not sure if this style has a name, but I saw this tweet some weeks ago that referred to it as the weird girl aesthetic. But if that doesn't mean anything to you, how I would describe it is a colorful, hyper-maximalist, cluttered style that references a lot of Y2K trends like micro minis, plastic jewelry, fuzzy bags, etc. If you come to New York City, I swear 90% of art school kids dress like this. So similar to my previous aesthetic breakdown videos, like the old money aesthetic and ballet core, we're going to be diving into the origins of this style and the cultural meanings. So I actually want to start this video with a little bit of Harajuku history. A lot of today's maximalist styling takes influence from Harajuku styles, whether or not people are aware of it. Case in point, Marc Jacobs' line Heaven, which was coined in the press as offering a slither of Marc's subversive aesthetic and approach to fashion, all while foregoing gender norms by focusing on a new generation of fashion creatives. Heaven, since its incarnation, has gained a massive Gen Z following, with celebrity cool girl icons such as Bella Hadid, Bia Badoobie, and Pink Pantheress helping to promote the brand. Heaven also hasn't shied away from its Harajuku influences. Shoichi Aoki, founder of Japanese street fashion magazine Fruits, was commissioned to capture 12 icons self-styling Heaven pieces for their first official lookbook. But let me backtrack. For anyone who's unfamiliar with Harajuku, it's an area of Tokyo, Japan, famous for its eclectic street fashion in the 90s and early 2000s. Gwen Stefani infamously made an entire album called Love Angel Music Baby, which were the stage names of the Japanese backup dancers she hired to follow her around everywhere, also known as the Harajuku Girls. Make no mistake, the entire ordeal was very orientalist and fetishistic.
What the fuck is going on in here on this day?
So prior to the 90s, there were some fashion movements in Japan like the Harajuku Zoku of the 1960s, the preppy style, bamboo tribe, and the DC boom of the 1980s. But otherwise, Shoichi Aoki notes that it wasn't until around 1996 when a turning point was reached in Japanese fashion. He notes that at this time, there were no trends. So people mixed brands, reconstructed and deconstructed garments, incorporated traditional Japanese clothes, and so forth. Japan was very influenced by what was actually happening in the streets of London. Secondhand clothing for a long time wasn't viewed as fashionable in Japan, but young people buying in London's Portobello and Camden markets were making it trendy. Since then, there's been a number of different fashions that have emerged in Harajuku, including Lolita, Cyber, Shironuri, Decora, etc. But something interesting is that there's also a good number of people who have blurred and integrated different elements of each of these styles to make an outfit that is wholly unique. But what was the reason for this creative outburst? Well, starting in the 1990s, Japan was going through a period of economic stagnation. People were getting laid off, suicide rates among middle-aged men were increasing, and juvenile delinquency on a whole was becoming way more common. There was growing widespread disillusionment, uncertainty, and anger that was just spreading across society. So, as society's values started to change, a lot of people, predominantly younger people, started to prioritize their individual identity over the corporate and family identity, which was the most important thing for a while in Japanese culture. On top of that, Aoki explains that it wasn't until around the 1950s when Western fashion was introduced to Japan. And so Japan consumed it all at once, giving way to a unique attitude and look that could only be seen as a result of this catch-up. It's actually quite liberating and free to pick and choose styles from history and combine them to create the unique looks that eventually evolved into the Japanese streetwear we see today. What I've always found very interesting about Harajuku styles is the use of thrifting and the use of wearing unconventional items on the body. Amelia Bloom writes in Power Play and Performance in Harajuku, being able to find and wear secondhand clothing in new ways is a mark of independence and a quiet resistance against the fashion system's dictums. They use experimental dressing to communicate with wider society their disillusionment with it. They are costuming their alienation and at times questioning the very meaning and function of dress. So, much of the reason why we know of Harajuku in the West is thanks to magazines such as Fruits and Kara, which exported the culture. But these weren't the only fashion magazines in existence. There were actually a good number, including Tune, Egg, Zipper, and Cutie, and many of these magazines actually invited schoolgirls to their offices to hang out or even work, as in the case of Heart Candy magazine, which recruited 18 to 20-year-olds as editorial staff. Yunia Kawamura describes how Harajuku was very trickle up. Most of the shops that existed there at the time of her research were opened up by young artists and students who had no formal training. It was also pretty common for fashion houses to employ teen girls as forecasters, designers, marketers, salespeople, merchandisers, stylists, models, you name it. But I don't want to overgeneralize. There is a noticeable difference between high fashion magazines and these street fashion magazines in Japan. Kawamura notes that when she was in Tokyo and speaking to industry people, these professionals were reluctant to be associated with street fashion or subcultural fashion. She quotes an independent publicist she met. These street fashion related magazines are looked down upon by the mainstream fashion community in Japan. I would not know what to say to my clients if their clothes appeared in one of these magazines. That would hurt their image and reputation. Granted, this was in the early 2000s when Kawamura was there doing her research, and nowadays I feel like street fashion and local influencers are valued pretty highly by the high fashion community, at least in the West. For instance, Louis Vuitton's Supreme collaboration in I think around 2016, and the overwhelming pressure for brands to form ambassadorships and partnerships with hip young influencers like Emma Chamberlain, Evan Mock, and all the nepotism babies in Hollywood. So, in the West, for the last couple of years now, minimalism has been on its way out and maximalism has been on its way in. What do I mean by these terms? Well, according to Museum of FIT's Minimalism/Maximalism exhibition, minimalism refers to the aesthetic of less is more. It celebrates purity and restraint, promoting qualities such as truth, order, and harmony. Minimalist fashions prioritize reduction and function, using clean lines and silhouettes to accentuate the relationship between body and garment. On the other hand, maximalism refers to spectacle. Its beauty lies in excess and eclecticism. Throughout history, maximalist fashions have been associated with extravagance, artifice, and non-functional style. As a journalistic term, maximalism is often used in reference to audacious, intricate aesthetics or exaggerated silhouettes. For the last 100 years or so, or maybe longer, there's been this natural pendulum swing between maximalism and minimalism. In the 80s, for instance, maximalism was all the rage with voluminous silhouettes and bold colors. It was all about ostentatious glamour. Pioneering designers of the time include Thierry Mugler and Gianni Versace. Then, in the 90s, the streamlined minimalist look came in with major contributions from Helmut Lang, Martin Margiela, and Prada. Also, as a response to the 80s excess of Wall Street, grunge consumed youth culture. The pendulum swung back to maximalism in the 2000s, which borrowed from 1980s excess. The Y2K party girl was messy and over the top, Paris Hilton reigned supreme, and there was no such thing as too many accessories. Then, as Sir Isaac Newton says, with every action is an equal and opposite reaction, so back to minimalism in the 2010s. Most fashion and lifestyle bloggers that were emerging showcased their minimalist modern homes, Instagram feeds were monotone, and blazers from the Row and Celine were ever on trend. On the youth front, grunge was making a comeback as soft grunge, and everything was in tones of black, white, pale pink, and pale blue. And now we're once again maximalist. On the high fashion front, Richard Quinn is known for experimenting with pattern, volume, and proportion, and even the Balenciaga Triple S sneaker, which came out in 2017, is a representation of the bigger is better ideology attributed to maximalism. Sarah Camposercone, hopefully I said that right, is a pretty big maximalist TikToker, and she has this video from January breaking down one of her outfits, which I think is pretty good.
Today we are going to get dressed, but what we're going to do is build the outfit together before we put it on. So all I've done so far is added this long sleeve. It's a sheer sleeve, so your arms are still kind of showing, but there's still something covering them. This is the first step of layering. Layering is my favorite thing in maximalism, so this is where we're at. So another thing I love about maximalism is mixing textures. This cardigan is full of sequins, and I'm going to put it on top of the dress. Looking at the waistline here, I'd love to add a belt and another texture. I'm going to be adding this tulle collar, which is actually meant to be worn like this, as a belt, and I'm just going to tie it up in the back. So to bring in another texture, I want to do this scrunchie, and I might do it as a necklace. It's hard to tell how it's going to look with this neckline, but if I can wrap it around that, I think that would look super cool. So I just so happen to have the matching scrunchie bag. I love matching when it's a little bit unexpected, and this matching situation I am living for. So I really want to wear my metallic gold Molly Goddard boots, but what I already went ahead and did was added a ribbon around the boots that I'm going to tie and lace up the whole way. So to mimic the ribbon colors, I'm going to do 2 different color gloves. Okay, so you know the Coco Chanel saying, before you leave the house, take one thing off. Well, I add one thing, or a few. So I have added this furry headband, and I'm going to add my YSL sunglasses to finish off the look.
There's a few different theoretical camps for maximalism. Some people just throw any pattern and color at the wall and see what sticks and what looks cool. Other people, like what Sarah was explaining here, go for a color theory. So even though patterns are different, there is one color palette that kind of brings balance and brings the look all together. Sarah's additional choice in wearing a pink scrunchie and a matching scrunchie bag brings in a nice textural balance to the outfit as well. On a simpler front, because not everyone is doing as much as Sarah does on an everyday basis, in the past year, we've seen lots of prints and patterns that play into maximalist tendencies. Psychedelic marbling prints via brands such as Gani and Hosbjerg, fruit patterns via Lisa Says Ga, and checkered patterns like one seen from Holiday the Label are a few examples. Layering and accessorizing are also 2 very important components in maximalism, and we've definitely seen a growth of those 2 things as well. For example, garments like arm warmers and leg warmers, vests, and subversive basics all give way to different and interesting types of layering. And with accessorizing, hats, earmuffs, chunky, playful plastic jewelry, and textured bags all produce a larger-than-life look. Other than the natural pendulum swing, sustainability is also a surprising, important catalyst for maximalism. And this sounds like kind of strange because you would think that to be sustainable, you would be minimalist because you're trying to live a less is more lifestyle. But a lot of TikTokers consider themselves to be sustainable maximalists in how they collect used, secondhand, vintage clothing, and how they try to bring life through older pieces in their closets through creative styling. And of course, the pandemic is a big factor in why maximalism is becoming cool again. CEO of Lisa Says Ga, Lisa Buller, comments on the power of prints. Coming out of dark times, the bright, bold, and colorful prints are refreshing and reflecting our uplifting post-vaccinated moods. Also, over the pandemic, a lot of people took on new DIY hobbies. TikTok, a major medium of where these videos were posted, grew to 100 million users in the US alone in 2020. I dabble a little bit with TikTok, and I've literally seen so many how-to videos on how to upcycle different clothes, how to knit, how to make carpets, or how to make rugs. Even brands themselves participated in this fostering of a DIY community over the pandemic. For example, the brand Shrimps ran an Instagram competition under the hashtag #StayAtHomeShrimps. The challenge was for fans to sketch their dream outfits, and the chosen winner would receive a shrimps bag of their choice. Depop, an online secondhand marketplace, but also a platform where community members sell original or upcycled clothing, saw a 40% increase in listings and a 65% uptick in sales for March 2020 compared to the same period in 2019, with traffic on the app up to 74%. My theory is that DIY inevitably leads to maximalism because when you're learning to create new things, when you're learning different artistic mediums, I feel like the compulsion is to go for more colors, more embellishments, because you're just trying to have fun and discover what you like. And even on the home interior front, cluttercore has been growing in popularity.
Imagine a mixture of dark academia meets semi-hoarding. It might be a minimalist's worst nightmare, but some say it's just an organized mess. Described as feeling like a warm and cozy antique shop, it's all about proudly displaying your favorite things in a loud, unapologetic way. What do you think about this aesthetic?
Okay, so my personal opinion on cluttercore is that the images in this TikTok actually bring me more anxiety than joy. But I do lean more towards like maximalism when it comes to my personal home interior design. I just lean more away from teenage bedroom and more towards the call me by your name house. With that said, I do think clutter is more interesting than minimalism. Contributing writer for Architectural Digest, Hannah Martin, explains the appeal. So many of the types of aesthetics that have germinated on social media platforms feel really devoid of personal style. What's fun about cluttercore is it requires personality and specialized interest in order to work, and it celebrates radical individuality. There's so much to look at that makes you smile. Isn't that so much more interesting than a boring room with some objects and unread books artfully arranged on a shelf? When you look at a cluttercore space, you learn something about the person who created it, and you want to know more. Similarly, writer Marianne Eloise notes that at a time when imitation is hard to avoid in the world of interiors, this trend offers a new style where the decor can't be duplicated. Maybe it's someone else's nightmare, but it means I get to live inside my own head. I also think that this interior design style reflects a lot of Gen Z attitudes towards fashion as well. When it feels like every influencer is wearing the same Shein two-piece set, when it feels like every influencer is wearing the same House of Sunny dress, it can be more fun and also more self-affirming to put together an outfit that is so random that it's unique and fully you. Another related topic that I've read about recently is what writer Judy Berman calls the era of unapologetic bad taste for her Time magazine piece that was published a few weeks ago. And I actually recommend reading the entire article because this is probably one of my favorite articles that I've read like all year. I think Judy Berman is a really good writer, and it was just a lot of fun and has a lot of good, challenging thoughts. She writes, "Everything is suddenly bigger, brighter, louder, raunchier. Designers are hawking hot pink suits, belt-length skirts, and logo-plastered handbags. After a boom in scripted programming, trashy reality TV is surging, and a resurgence fueled by self-consciously trashy shows like Selling Sunset and F-Boy Island. The most salient new sound in recent years is hyperpop, a dizzyingly hooky, wildly referential microgenre that has been described by one of Spotify's influential data alchemists as ebullient electro-maximalism. Part of what's causing this cultural movement is climate change nihilism, information overload, and the fact that most of us are chronically online and disconnected from physical communities, whether or not we like to admit that." Again, I love the way Judy writes. There's this one phrase she uses: "Our collective long COVID of the soul has led to a tidal wave of tackiness." Like, chef's kiss, thank you, Queen, for your prose. So, the numbness that we feel towards our socio-political environment has led some of us to seek sensory stimulation in the form of maximalism as a form of escapism. And not just maximalism in an artistic comme des garçons way, but maximalism in a bad taste kind of way. Think Lady Gaga as Patricia Gucci and her terribly comedic Italian accent.
This is serious.
Think the relationship performance of Megan Fox and Machine Gun Kelly.
Oh my God, what is that? Oh my God, what is that?
And when I talk about bad taste, it's not inherently like a negative thing, even though the previous two examples I mentioned are a little bit cringe. But Berman describes her definition of bad taste as a value-neutral style that revels in schlock, camp, and raunch for their own sakes, separating it from poor taste, which is tastelessness in a mean way, like making ableist jokes at the Oscars. This is admittedly like a new definition of bad taste that I'm fully embracing, by the way. Traditionally, bad taste has always had bad connotations, and coincidentally has also had ties to maximalism, at least since the 80s. Umberto Eco described the structure of bad taste in 1989. A dress designed so as to enhance the charms of its wearer is not, by definition, a product of bad taste, though it would be if it drew the attention of the viewer only to the more obvious attributes of the wearer, thus reducing her personality to a mere prop for one particular physical trait. Where good taste is demure, bad taste is bawdy. Where good taste is minimalist, bad taste is maximalist. Where good taste whispers, bad taste screams, look, react, feel. But in this modern or postmodern era, bad taste and good taste are arbitrary. The demolition of the taste hierarchy has been gradually going on for a while now, but the reason that I think the biggest contributing reason for it, in my opinion, is because our culture is becoming less dominated by the upper class white elite, which has historically been the only class to create and dictate what is considered highbrow and what is considered lowbrow. To relate that back to fashion, even though there are trends that stick out these days, like low-rise jeans and subversive basics, this is probably the first time in our historical timeline where there are so many different styles or aesthetics coexisting all at once, with not one being objectively better than the others. Also before, being part of a subculture was way more serious. Like, you wouldn't just wear a cut-up t-shirt secured with safety pins in the 1970s unless you were aligned with the punk movement. You didn't just wear baggy flannels and Nirvana t-shirts in the 90s if you weren't grunge. Nowadays, people, Gen Z in particular, are just way more carefree about style. If you think an aesthetic is cool, you can try it on for size. That's why I think a lot of these aesthetics are evidently called aesthetics and not subcultures, because it's just very surface level.
Our friend Melissa Garcia is here to talk to us all about this, how we can recreate this look for our shelf. Okay, so we're calling this, I want to make sure I get this right, coastal, I've been calling it coastal grandma chic. I'm throwing in the chic, but coastal grandma.
Yes.
We've got your first model. You're going to walk us out here, tell us what she's wearing, and tell us what
Yes.
this is.
So this is basically a whole moment. It's in fashion, we'll do decor after, but it's really like coastal living, that really effortless vibe.
Though I will say that actually cottagecore and dark academia, I think, are two of some of the aesthetics that lean more into subculture category because they have their little online communities. But for a lot of aesthetics, like, I don't know, the coconut girl aesthetic or the coastal grandma aesthetic, I haven't seen any kind of like community orientation around those. And something else about Gen Z, their generational humor is based on irony. A lot of times combining irony with nostalgia. A popular subset of Gen Z-led graphic design consists of word art typography, mismatched fonts, bold primary colors, and wobbling logos, all maximalist, might I add. So in my opinion, all these different factors work together to raise maximalism up on the current pedestal that it is today. So there was one response to the Weird Girl fashion tweet I mentioned earlier that really stuck with me. Teleport to Me Jane says, Harajuku has amazing crazy thrift stores, and I think the difference between these girls is that the Western influencers' clothes look new, something from Urban Outfitters / Dolls Kill, seemingly with the intention of looking weird versus liking unique things despite them mismatching. Even though I think that there are very good examples of maximalism in the West, this tweet is also very valid. Essentially what this person is saying is that 90s Harajuku styles were dominated by thrifting and upcycling practices, which organically led to eclectic styles. In contrast, a lot of influencers today who are leaning towards maximalist tendencies gravitate towards specific brands like Dolls Kill or even Heaven, which create new mass-produced designs based on vintage aesthetics. In the end, Western maximalists can end up looking more manufactured. That's not to say that all Western maximalists are like this. Like I mentioned before, Sarah and some other Instagrammers / TikTokers / fashion influencers who view themselves as sustainable maximalists embrace the upcycling and thrifting practices that we saw in 90s Harajuku. When flipping through Fruits magazines, you can see that teens in these photos were much more eccentric and authentic, and that their clothes were actually vintage. Every piece they wear seems to indicate that person's specific interest or personality. It's like cluttercore. To do it right requires a lot of personalization, which can't really be taught. The difference is that also back in the 90s, in the words of Shoichi Aoki, the internet didn't exist then and there weren't significant trends, so people had to figure it out by themselves. With that said, Aoki did shut down Fruits back in 2017, saying very simply that there are no more cool kids left to photograph. This decline in coolness can be attributed to a number of reasons. Some people blame the role of fast fashion and the Uniqlo clothing boom, which championed the exact opposite ethos of 90s Harajuku: simplicity, functionality, and comfortability. Aoki also blames the closure of Pedestrian Paradise, or Hagoshu Tengoku, in 1998. This area was a major gathering spot for cool and creative hip young adults and teens. And on top of its closure, international chains started to move into Harajuku as well, further sucking away the originality that was left. ID Magazine published in 2017, there's still the odd shops like Dog and 6% Doki Doki hidden close to Takashita Street that cater to fruits-worthy kids, but they are few and far between, and most of Harajuku now feels decidedly un-Japanese. Although the area has tourism to thank for its success in part, this has ultimately been the cause of its overexposure. And fashion designer Daphne Mojaher, who worked with Fruits in 2010, notes, "People wear a lot less vintage, there is less of a sense of eclecticism and much more mainstream fast fashion. They look good, but they look familiar." But never fear, Aoki has recently mentioned in interviews that he does want to revive his Fruits project because he's been sensing a revival in Japanese fashion. The question he's now exploring is how, because the magazine industry is unfortunately a dying industry. Which I think is really a shame, because one of the reasons why I liked Fruits so much and why I like a lot of these indie teen magazines is that they actually showcase actual kids in the neighborhood. Nowadays, the media is dominated by influencers and celebrities, and a little bit is fine. I think some people have good style, but the tendency is that a lot of these higher profile people have these brand sponsorships or ambassadorships that get in the way with like really truly free personal styling. And also, like, not all of them are fashion people. Like, just because they're in some new trendy HBO Max show doesn't mean that they should be on the cover of Vogue, you know? So I'm holding out for a new wave of youth-dominated indie magazines to come out in the vibe shift. But until then, please let me know in the comments what you think about maximalism, TikTok, Harajuku fashion, really anything I've talked about in this video. I would love to hear what y'all have to say on it. And thanks for hanging out with me today, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!